Thank you very much to Dr. Debisi Araba and Musonmola Umoru for the informative talk. A quick reminder, we urge you to click on the button in the scrolling banner to access our GoFundMe account to make your donation in support of this honorable cause, as well as share this cause, of course, with your network as well. We urge you to, of course, do this so that we can definitely support even our beneficiaries so that they can do more of that good work that they're already doing. We take much pleasure in introducing our first plenary of the conference, themed Food Security. Can Africa feed itself and feed the world? This session will be moderated by Claudine Wakasa. The stage is yours. Take it away.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for choosing to be with us here today at the Africa Philanthropy Forum 2020. I'm very excited to be your moderator for this session. As mentioned, my name is Claudine Wakasa, and I lead Canada's clean technology or green economy work here in Africa as part of the Trade Commissioner Service. We're here today to have a conversation on how Africa can feed itself and feed the world, and framing this conversation within the potential for philanthropic funds to play a greater role in catalyzing this transformation in African agriculture. This will be a 40-minute session, and it will be structured in two parts. The first is a discussion with our distinguished panelists who will share some key lessons from their work in the agriculture sector in Africa, after which we'll open it up to you, the audience, for any questions you may have. Now, we'll be taking questions throughout the session, so please submit them in the Q&A box. And also let us know if you'd like a specific panelist to respond to your question. We'll do our best to respond to as many of them as possible. If you'd like to participate online, you can follow us on Twitter at APF.org and join the conversation using the hashtag APF20. Once more, thank you all for joining us, and we hope you'll find this session very useful. So on the panel, we're honored to have some of the best minds in African agriculture with us. First, we have Dr. Martin Fegene, who's the director in the Department of Agriculture and Agro-Industry at the African Development Bank. We have Mezua Nuneli, who's the managing partner at Sahel Capital Agribusiness Managers Limited and co-founder of Ace Foods. And to round out this brilliant panel, we have Michelle Kagari, who's the Global Director for Government Relations and Policy at One Acre Fund. Welcome to you all, and we are very pleased to have you with us.
Thank you, Claudine.
Dr. Fregene, I'd like to start with you as part of setting the scene around this conversation. So we see the commitment of the African Development Bank to bringing about modern agriculture in Africa, drawing from what has been seen in Thailand and Brazil and a number of other countries. So based on the progress and the data that the bank has developed in the implementation of the Feed Africa strategy, why and where do you see Africa uniquely positioning itself to establish itself as the breadbasket for the world?
Thank you very much, Claudine, and it's a pleasure to join you all on this panel. I'm also happy to be here with my good friend Mr. Wuneli and others on the panel. First of all, it might interest you to know that Africa has 200 million hectares of uncultivated land. This is about 60% of the remaining uncultivated land on the continent. It might also interest you to know that African agriculture in the last 10 years has grown at a steady 2.5%. So there's some good news, there's some bright spot. That's the highest level of annual growth of agriculture on the continent, globally. But it's not enough. That's the truth. Our population is growing faster than agriculture is growing, and our per capita GDP is also growing pretty fast. That means that we have a growing middle class that requires more meat, that requires more vegetables, more high-value food. So Africa has been importing food. As of today, we are importing $47 billion worth of food. That is just too much for a continent that needs to employ its young people, for a continent that also needs to grow its economy. But the reality is Africa, being mostly tropical, can actually do what Brazil did in the Cerrados in the 1970s and 1980s, where Brazil, a tropical country, became one of the powerhouse of food production globally. And to do that, what Africa needs to do is we need to invest in technologies, the science of growing food, improve varieties, improve soil amendments. We also need to invest in value addition. Africa today has only about half of the global average of value addition on food. We need to also invest in know-how, especially of the young people. We need to build their capacity to be able to produce food in modern ways and also add value in modern ways. Policies are also very important. Government has to create incentives to ensure that the SMEs that today feed more than 80% of Africa's populations, have a level playing field, and they can, reach their capacity, their full capacity. We also need to ensure that the infrastructure, that's part of the policy incentives, road infrastructures, warehouse infrastructures, storage infrastructures, the power, the telecom infrastructures are in place to be able to support the SMEs that are making this happen. These are already happening. The African Development Bank launched a very ambitious program called Feed Africa in 2016 to raise food productivity, crop productivity, and livestock also, and also to raise value addition on the African continent. Today, we have a $4.5 billion portfolio that is trying to do just that. Our flagship program, Technologies for African Agricultural Transformation, or TAT, is trying to reach 40 million farmers with improved varieties, heat-tolerant wheat varieties, drought-tolerant maize varieties, improved cassava varieties, improved rice varieties, so that we can raise our productivity. Our productivity is still about a third of the world's productivity, so there's a real large room for improvement here. In addition, the African Development Bank has launched what we call TAT for the Savannah, whereby the vast savannas, about 400 million hectares, that stretches from Senegal all the way down to South Africa, can be transformed into bread baskets for maize, soybean, and poultry, and thereby, raising, access to protein for Africans, and also reducing our imports. Ghana, for example, imports $500 million worth of poultry every year. TAT for the Savannah is also a conservation agriculture program in the sense that we practice zero tillage that allows the soils to always be covered and improve soil health, improve soil organic matter, helps the microorganisms in the soil to thrive. TAT for the Savannah has already achieved 10,000 hectares in Ghana, in Zambia, in Gabon. We hope to move to other countries. What we are seeing today is that Africa indeed has a capacity and actually the potential to feed the world is there. But as I said, there has to be investment in productivity increase, in value addition. There has to be investments in enabling policies, investments in the people itself, the young people, especially the young people and the women. But let me leave it there for now. I'm sure my other colleagues also have something to say about this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And opening it up to Menzo as well. Why would you say Africa is uniquely positioned to feed the world?
Sure. And I think just to give some context as well, global population is roughly 7.8 billion. Africa is 1.2 billion of that. And if we look over the next 30 years, while Africa's population would roughly double to 2.4 billion, I think the world's population would only grow slightly above that. So from the context of Africa feeding the world, I think it's also important to realize that this is also Africa feeding itself, since a big portion of that population growth will come from the continents. And so we need to pay particular attention to that. And the other thing to note as well, and Dr. Fregnay touched on it a little bit, is that we have lots of arable land that is not being used. We have different climate types from northern Africa to southern to the tropics in the middle belt, and a large available workforce that can actually engage in this sector. So we have different key components of the tools that are needed to actually boost productivity and meet this food demand. And it's critical not just for a food security issue, but also a economic balance of trade issue as well. Now, in terms of thinking about, is this feasible? How can it be done? What should we need to, pay attention to? I think, one key issue is yield, and Dr. Fregne touched on that as well a little bit earlier, is how can we boost yield? And is it feasible to boost yield on the continent vis-a-vis other regions of the world that can enable, this demand to be met? Now, if we look at yields of crops in many other parts of the world, I think you find quite a bit of efficiency in especially many of the developed markets where the incremental yield gains year on year in many key markets is relatively minimal. It's there, but it's relatively minimal. And of course, there are new innovations going on. But on the African continent, we have yields that are quite low, fraction of world averages. And just by addressing different key issues that can bring the yields on the continent to global world averages would double output across many different crop value chains. So if you just think about closing that gap of food supply into the world, into the continent, the world, it's, a lot of that boost would come from addressing yield issues on the continent, addressing post-harvest waste on the continent, and not only to address our own requirements, but also a lot of the demand that's out there in the world.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And so we're hearing something around the land, the arable land that's available, the youth dynamic where we have a lot of labor that can participate in the agriculture sector. Michelle, why do you think Africa is uniquely positioned to feed itself and to feed the world?
Thank you, Claudine. I'm really happy to be on this panel discussing such an important topic. I think my colleagues Martin and Mezuo have amply addressed the macro aspects of what really positions Africa very well. What I'd like to dig into is into the issue of increased productivity and some of the tweaks that can be done to actually get us to that point where our yield gets to global levels. And this is really looking at systemic approaches and some of the challenges that farmers have had traditionally that have kept productivity low. And in particular, there's been the issue of access to high quality agricultural inputs, which Martin already mentioned. There's been the issue of access to information on the best practices to maximize productivity, especially on small pieces of land, as well as access to information on climate smart practices that would maintain like the soil health, mitigate negative impacts of climate change, as well as information on how to mitigate post-harvest losses, and then access to financing so that they can get, so that farmers can be able to get the quality input and get the quality, the information that they need to maximize productivity, as well as access to market. So one of the things that would really allow us to maximize the potentials that's there is using a systems-wide approach and looking at the entire agriculture value chain, the food value chain, from the points of access to the inputs through to the farming techniques themselves, through to harvesting, through to access to market. And I think when we start harnessing some of the interventions that have been going on, so there's been a lot of innovations in technology with regards to like the Internet of Things, which can really help farmers connect not only with information, but connect with other farmers and connect to markets. So being able to leverage those innovations would not only increase like the involvement of SMEs and youth in these kinds of, in the agriculture value chain, but also really go a long way into incentivizing further investment in agriculture. One of the other things as well is recognizing where our farmers are. We currently have about 33 million smallholder farmers. Many of them are in subsistence farming. many of them, the reality is struggle to feed themselves. So ensuring that at the macro level, when we are developing policies, that these policies are responsive to the lived realities of farmers, and that they engage with addressing the very real obstacles that they have that prevent them from accessing inputs, accessing financing, accessing markets, and also moving and growing with farmers so that you walk that journey with them, not just from subsistence farming, but through to higher value food production would be, I'd say, how we can actually achieve that noble ambition of improving productivity and yields.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Michelle. And I think there's definitely clear consensus that Africa has the resources and the potential to feed itself and the world. And though we're seeing production has increased, at least in absolute terms, I think most of you have begun talking about some of the challenges that we're seeing around sustaining this kind of increase in production or making it more competitive on a global stage. So I'm hearing some of the challenges already coming out around financing to the sector. There was a little bit about engaging constructively with smallholder farmers. And more recently, we're hearing more around climate change and how to manage through pandemics. Mezo, I'll come to you on this, just given your work with ACE Foods and engaging with smallholder farmers. I'm very curious to know, what have you seen as one of the biggest challenge in bringing in this segment of farmers, and how do you see the prospect going forward?
Sure, and I think not only in ACE Foods, but I think in Sahel, a couple of our portfolio companies in Kogi State and in Anambra in particular also work with, in addition to our commercial farms, smallholder farmers and bringing them on board. And I think there are a couple different dynamics that different stakeholders work with. So the first, of course, is, and from the very basic of identifying those smallholder farmers that, for whatever reason, make sense for you to, with that particular region, to work with, whether it's based on interests, proximity to your own farm, plants, etc., aggregating them. Then there's the extension work that is needed to actually engage with them to, whether it's training, whether it's provision of inputs, like I'm sure Kola will speak with that Bamagona does in Kaduna, but a whole spectrum of work done to ensure that the farmers actually have the tools that they need to actually do the work. Then the next bit is linked to that is financing, because the question is who provides that financing to the smaller farmers? Is it the off-taker that is willing to use their balance sheet to provide that financing, and many off-takers are hesitant to do that? Is it through different private sector or government-led programs? So the Nigerian government, for example, has the Anchor Borrower scheme that's available for farmers to access, but accessing this capital is not always easy, straightforward, or efficient. And you need to make sure that this money is available when it's required, at the start of the planting season for farmers to engage with. And then, of course, working with 100 farmers is very different from working with 10,000 farmers. And so as you scale up the engagement, you also need to make sure you have your processes, control systems in place to enable you scale up this dynamic. And it's not easy to do. And but I think it's something that is critical for many key private sector players to do, not only to strengthen their own the resilience of their own supply chains, but also to address overall yield and crop outputs in their particular areas.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I see Kola Masha has joined us. For the audience, Kola is the managing director and co-founder of Babangwana. Kola, are you on the line? Can you hear us?
I can hear you perfectly. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. And just maybe you can jump on what Mezo had started speaking about, just because we know Babangwana has also been very successful in addressing some of the systemic issues facing smallholder farmers in Nigeria. So just curious to know some of the approaches that you have taken in addressing these challenges, and what are some of the models that you think we can begin to scale across the continent?
Well, probably prior to answering that, just to touch on the excellent comments of my colleagues on the panel before, I think I just wanted to add on I think when we think about the role of agriculture on the continent, we have to think about it more broadly in not just its impact on food security, but I think its impact broadly on economic development and security more broadly. I think fundamentally, if you look at our work here at Babangona, right, today we are the single largest maize producing entity in West Africa. We're farming 80,000 acres of maize, an area equivalent to about 5 Manhattans, producing enough food to feed every man, woman, and child in Nigeria for nearly a week. But fundamentally, the reason we are in this is because of the 110,000 jobs we've created for smallholder farmers. Because fundamentally, that to us, we see as hands down our biggest risk. As oxygen is to fire, so are unemployed youth to insecurity, right? In a period of 20 years, from 1990 to 2010, we saw 20 million young people enter the Nigerian workforce, triggering youth unemployment to spike to 60%, triggering not 1, not 2, but 3 insurgencies. And the reality is from 2010 to 2030, 4 times that number of youth, 80 million people, will be entering an already oversaturated workforce. The sad reality is, I think, in Nigeria today, as we speak, I think we're seeing the unfortunate impact of this problem. Now, we firmly believe that across the continent, there's 150 million young people that could benefit from activities like what we do at Babangona, supporting farmers to really become very economically viable. So I think to go back to your point on what's critical, right? At the end of the day, if you look at the challenges a smallholder farmer faces in Africa, it really all comes down to one underlying structural problem, and that problem is low economies of scale. And really what we've tried to do at Babangona is solve that fundamental low economy of scale the same way that it was solved in North America, in Europe, in Asia, and Latin America, nearly 100 years ago. And that was by bringing economies of scale to thousands of smallholder farmers through the power of farmer cooperatives. And so at the end of the day, what we've done is franchised a network of thousands and thousands of grassroots level farmer cooperatives and brought to them that required economies of scale, where supporting them with their inputs, with the credit, with the financing, with the storage and marketing support to enable the average farmer to achieve a net income that is typically about 2.5 times the national average. And so I think the reality is it's not one piece, it's really that comprehensive set of services that is required.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much for that perspective. And I think that's a good segue to you, Dr. Fegene. We've talked about what's happening at the grassroots, what's happening on the ground with smallholder farmers. How is the AFDB supporting that important demographic in farming?
No, thank you very much, Claudine. And just to add to what Ms. Zuo and Kola and Michelle have said, smallholder farmers currently still produce the bulk of food on the African continent, and there's no way you can get around, that. As much as we want commercial farms to come on board, it's still way behind what smallholder farmers produce. First of all, there are 3 challenges that I see that we face. The first one is access to the best production technologies, both the seeds and the practices and the mechanization. The second one being, the high transaction costs of they're getting their produce to into the market. Just the infrastructure, and the limited telecom infrastructure. Because today ICT you can do extension through ICT. You can do marketing through ICT, but then the infrastructure in the rural areas is not as good, telecom-wise, as in the cities. And the third challenge is just the policy. Often, the trade policies are not aligned to agricultural policies. You give farmers subsidies in Ghana, but you allow people to bring in chicken, from the US, at 0 tariffs. It's just not aligned. So what we've been doing at the bank, first of all, on the productivity is we're working in 9 commodities. As I said before, it's called Technologies for African Agricultural Transformation. 9 commodities. We're working with seed companies. We're working with governments. Governments are front and central if you're going to really impact a lot of people. And then also we're working with national agricultural research centers, to bulk the seeds of modern varieties. For example, drought-tolerant maize varieties. It's been around for 10 years, developed by the research centers. but only 20% in Southern Africa, where you have the cycles of drought, use these varieties. So we're working with all the seed companies, the seed traders associations, with government, to just bulk the early generation seeds that are needed to be able to get the certified seeds for farmers to use. That's the first thing. On the infrastructure, a major constraint. Well, what we're doing here is twofold. First of all, we are trying to create what we call special agro-processing zones, whereby areas of high food production, you kind of try to solve the logistics, the supply chain, and the infrastructure problems. You target your investment. But apart from that, we also working with others, development partners like IFAD and the World Bank on building rural roads and also warehouse infrastructures to ease the cost of marketing for some of these farmers. And third, on the policy, we have to engage with government. Government cannot ignore that trade policies often harm farmers. There's no point, removing all the tariffs on imported maize and chicken when your farmers really rely upon production of crops to survive. So we kind of, with policy-based operations, persuading governments to look very carefully at their trade policies and make sure they are aligned to agricultural policies. Thank you.
Thank you. And perfect. Thank you for that. I think we're starting to get real clarity on what some of the issues are and some of the approaches that are being taken to address those issues. However, we're trying to frame the conversation a bit more around philanthropy, just given it is the Africa Philanthropy Forum. And one thing one question that keeps coming up is, what is the role of philanthropy? So we currently have government budgets, they're extremely stressed or stretched because of the pandemic and the global economic downturn. It's estimated that almost $1 trillion is deployed every year through private philanthropic capital, which dwarfs what a lot of governments or countries are giving us as foreign aid budgets. So how do you think philanthropic capital can begin to bridge some of the capital gaps or the financing gaps that we're seeing in the agriculture sector? And I'll start with you, Mezo, for that.
Sure, and just to give more full context, in terms of capital that is going to this sector, it's very limited. So in Nigeria, for example, roughly 2.5% of bank loan portfolio is actually directed at the agriculture sector, and the lion's share of this goes to larger corporates versus farmers or SMEs that may need this capital. And this loan portfolio mix can probably be extrapolated across the continent. In terms of equity capital as well, there's also a limited amount of equity capital that's available to go to this space. So, at Sahel, we managed roughly, $67 million of capital to invest in ag SMEs in the region, but we're dropping in the bucket compared to the substantive demand that's out there. Now, from a philanthropic perspective, I think there are many ways that individuals can think of how to support and help, drive this sector, and across a number of different metrics. So, of course, they can be capital provided, philanthropic dollars provided to impact type funds, either from a first loss perspective or to encourage mandates that allocate capital to segments that don't necessarily attract that money, whether it's closer to farmers, much smaller companies, less commercial, is one bucket. Another bucket, that I think is very important is sort of ecosystem skill set development, because there is a knowledge gap, across the board. So there's a knowledge gap with the farmers themselves who need skills training to do what they do better. There is a knowledge gap with service providers of capital, whether banks or private equity firms or other service providers. How are you providing dollars to help enhance skill sets, knowledge, whatever is required, so that segment can better engage with those that need that support within the region. Then, of course, the other is through technical assistant type facilities. So at Sahel, for example, in addition to our commercial money, we have a small bucket of donor capital that we use for a range of different things, from product certification to helping put together outgrower schemes, capacity building, to the degree that some of that philanthropic dollars can go towards, different TA facilities that are available across the continent to help, strengthen skill sets, I think is very important. But I think a big component is definitely knowledge share, capacity building, that those dollars can be allocated separate from, providing dollars that can go into potential existing funds that are doing work in this sector.
Perfect. Thank you so much for framing that for us. So we're hearing a bit around the high impact of investing in impact funds, looking at ecosystem skills development and, different tech assistance facilities. Michelle and Kola, this next question is to you, just given how closely you work with smallholder farmers. We're interested to know, has there been a successful or a success story related to philanthropic funds tapering down to the farmers that you work with? Maybe Michelle, you can go first.
Sure, thanks, Claudine. Yeah, I think the story of One Acre Fund really has grown off the support of philanthropy. Philanthropy allows us to take risks. It provides that cushion where you can innovate. And especially where you're doing innovations that are disrupting the way things are normally done. Mezuo talked, for example, about the challenges of providing financing, and especially to smallholder farmers. Looking at private sector actors, the credibility or the credit worthiness of smallholder farmers means that a lot of people will be hesitant to bear the risk of lending financing or providing financing. But we were able to innovate and test out an entire bundle of services that included financing. And it's a bit of a mix of microfinancing, but not quite. But what it does is it uses, similar to microfinances, it uses group liability, but it's entirely responsive to the lived realities of farmers. So providing them with the farming inputs that they need on credit, flexible repayment, so they can pay whatever they can afford when they can afford it, provided they pay by the end of the season, and then making sure that you're not providing high levels of interest rates. So your service fee, whatever we are charging for the services we provide, everything is very clear at the beginning. So a farmer knows my loan is X amount. On average, the loans our farmers take is about $100, and that is what they'll pay at the end of the season. And ever since One Acre Fund started, and it's now about 16 years, we've had on average over 93% repayment rate year on year. And we have now grown to a point where we are serving 1 million smallholder farmers annually. But this form of financing requires an organization to be willing to bear those losses on its books. And philanthropy has really allowed us to test this model, prove that it works, and scale it. Other areas where philanthropy has really helped, again, picking on some of the things that Mezuo talked about, is we were able to establish a private-public partnership with the government of Rwanda and a private seed manufacturer to produce hybrid maize seed in Rwanda. And it is through philanthropy that we were able to support and discuss and come up with this public-private partnership that has resulted in the production of hybrid, high-quality maize seed for farmers in Rwanda, and hopefully through the region as well. And we are just embarking on an initiative, again with philanthropic support, for an ambitious 1 billion trees project, which is intended to help support farmers to mitigate the negative impact of climate change, but at the same time, to leverage trees as one of the assets that they can have when they're dealing with some of the challenges when it comes to climate change. And then finally, it has allowed us to explore ways of improving safety nets for farmers. For example, crop insurance. We had, again, a public-private partnership with the government of Kenya to provide crop insurance to farmers. Philanthropic support allowed us to explore these options with government. And we are now hoping that we can get to a point where there will be permanent investment in options to provide insurance for smallholder farmers.
So I think I think for me, I think it's very important that the African philanthropic space learns from some of the challenges that I think have kind of inhibited the development of social enterprises on the continent in the past. I think the reality is that traditional philanthropy is very focused on one, financing pretty much exclusively nonprofits. Two, they are very interested in financing specific, innovative, small projects, which mean that because they want to basically have a sense of, my money went towards creating this thing that would never have existed if my money didn't go there. And I think what that creates is really two things. One is it doesn't create an ecosystem for scalability and sustainability. I think the reality is, if you look at the end of the day, I think if we begin with the need, at the beginning of this, I talked about the fact that we have about 150 million smallholder farmers that need support on this continent. To support them would require somewhere in the range of about $75 billion in capital, right? All philanthropic capital on the globe is roughly estimated to be about 400 billion. So that's a very significant portion of all philanthropic capital. However, if you think about it in the context of debt, there's $150 trillion of debt out there. And so the reality is, I strongly encourage philanthropy to think a little bit differently and to think about how your capital can go in and be very focused on accomplishing one thing: catalyzing in more capital to solve a problem at scale, right? And I think that is, fundamentally where we've focused all of our philanthropic capital that we've raised. We've focused on ensuring that philanthropic capital can come in and comes in a way in our capital structure that literally for every dollar that comes in philanthropic capital, we're able to raise $4 to $5 in additional capital. And that is fundamentally how we've been able to scale as rapidly as we have to now serve, tens of thousands, cumulatively now 110,000 farmers, farming in an area, as I mentioned, equivalent of 5 Manhattans. So I would encourage philanthropy to think a little bit differently. And if you do need to focus on giving just grants, there are innovative ways you can give grants to catalyzing capital. You can support. We've had folks come in and support some of the legal costs or fundraising costs associated with being able to catalyze an additional capital. All of these things, but I think at the end of the day,
Sorry, Kola, we can't hear you. I think we've lost him briefly. But we got the gist of what he was speaking on, just the need to think a bit more creatively in channeling philanthropic funds. And Dr. Fregene, maybe we can conclude with you, just to give us a sense of the ways in which AFDB is working together with different philanthropic organizations towards changing the agriculture landscape in Africa. What are you seeing working well, and what are some of the examples that you can share with us?
Well, Claudine, thank you very much. Like Kola and Michelle Amezuo said, philanthropic capital is really important. Why? Because one is patient capital. It's not looking for a quick turnaround, investments. And also secondly, because it's capital that can be used in ways that gives flexibility to the beneficiary. And I will talk about just 3 things, and I'm going to draw my experiences from Latin America. The first one is building know-how. The second one, and I know Mezu has touched upon it. The second is helping to catalyze, traditional capital into the sector, and Kola has also talked about it. And the last is advocacy. And I will just give some experiences from what the bank is doing. In Brazil, there's what he calls Senar. Senar is a vocational training organization that is built by all the producers, all the farmers, and all. They have a big association. And Senar is probably the biggest extension body in the world. It provides training to all parts of the value chain, from production to processing, everything. And it's now all online. I think what Philanthropy Capital can do is probably begin to replicate that kind of vocational training. It's so important, from tractor driving to milking cows. You know, where in Africa do you go for this kind of training? Philanthropy Capital can work with existing associations, existing platforms, can work with governments to put online this incredible resource. And we're working now in what we call TIE. TIE is Technology, Innovation, and Enterprise. We're trying to set up the very first one in Rwanda, whereby we put everything online, working with the university and working with the government. We put everything online with respect to agricultural development. That's the first one. The second one is catalyzing capital. There is no gainsaying that Africa, and like Kola has so well mentioned with figures, that we need more than $30 billion every year invested in agriculture. And of that, the development banks and the governments provide no more than 10 billion. So we still need about 20 billion to come from capital. But like you said, like Kola said, the banks are not willing to lend to agriculture because they feel it's risky. It's changing, of course. But that is where philanthropic capital can come in. For example, Argentina, is one of the biggest producers of soybean in the world. It's like number 2 exporter. But all the Argentine soybean processors, you know where they get the money from? From the city of Buenos Aires. The city of Buenos Aires has come up with instruments to be able to finance, the soybean producers, simply because the soybean producers have some patient capital that actually blends the more commercial capital coming out. We again have set up what we call the Souk Al Tanmia platform in Morocco. It's a platform of SMEs whereby we provide, some patient capital, and then we also provide technical assistance, and then we provide a platform, a virtual platform where everybody can come and receive technical assistance in preparing their business plans, and then some patient capital to de-risk the more commercial capital coming in. And lastly, advocacy. We all know that governments, are moved by the people that really push the hardest. Philanthropy capital can, working with the SMEs and working also with the people, push for changes to policies, especially the trade policy. The trade policies are probably killing Africa. There's so much that the trade policies are doing to our farmers that is really negative. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. Just in the interest of time, I realize we're slightly over, so I'll begin concluding. We've had quite a bit around what philanthropic funds can do on the continent, some of the gaps in financing that exist. I noted most of the questions on the chat were around financing and how the youth can access finance. And I hope we provided you with quite a number of good examples of how financing is working and philanthropic finance funding is working to target smallholder farmers. I'll end there, and I want to thank my panelists once more, Dr. Martin Fegene, Kola Masha, Michelle Kagiri, and Mezo Nunelli. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you to the Africa Philanthropy Forum. Again, reminding you to please contribute to the GoFundMe cause that has been identified already. We're looking at Farm Grow in Africa and how we can contribute to helping them do their mandate, which is really focused on youth and the smallholder farmer. So thank you all once more and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to our speakers. And of course, a big thank you also to our moderator, Claudine Wakasa. We invite you to network, interact, and join in the speed networking session. Now, this is the opportunity for you to also share some ideas, gain encouragement, or even, in fact, network and just gain a lot of value out of this session, because now we're going into the speed networking session. So go to the tab labeled networking. During the speed networking session, you need to click on a table that has a seat available. You'll pop into a Zoom interface and you can start networking from there. Now, this will all start in a few moments right after I've made all of the necessary announcements. We welcome you to participate in these sessions by leaving your questions in the QA box, and we would like to remind you also to make a donation, just as our previous moderator has also mentioned at the end of her speech. The platform will be open for you to engage and network at any time, and do continue your conversation on social media as well. You can use the hashtag APF2020. Today's session will close after the breakout sessions. A reminder that we will reconvene tomorrow at 1 p.m. West African time. A quick reminder, we urge you to click on the button in the scrolling banner to access our GoFundMe account to make your donation in support of this honorable cause, as well as to share this cause with your network as well. The final inclusion in our program for day 2 welcomes you to join a breakout session of choice. Now, there's 3 to choose from, and all 3 of them have different topics or themes. Session number 1 is titled Repositioning Farmers to Mitigate and Adapt to Climate Change, and this will be moderated by Ifi Umunna, the project lead of Nourishing Africa. Breakout session number 2 will be based on gender equality, women empowerment, and climate change. And this will be moderated by Dr. Kemi Da Silva Ibru, founder of WARIF. Breakout session number 3 will be titled Climate Change and Malnutrition, Why We Need to Act Now. This will be moderated by Dr. Orode Doherty, founder of a medical and also the medical director of Ingress Health Partners and founder of African Children's Hospital Foundation. The virtual stage is yours.